Good morning, everyone. Amazing to see so many of you in here. Hopefully you'll all still be here when I'm finished. For those of you who know what the business report is, you know what's coming. For those of you who don't, if you don't like data, then the door is that way. But before I dive into all of the business stuff, building a bit on what Ben was talking about, sort of reclaiming the dance floor, I want to take it another level up, and I'm going to keep this as politically neutral as I can. There is so much going on in the world today that might not feel like it's part of the electronic music scene and culture, but everybody in there, everybody on the dance floor, everybody behind the decks, behind the mixer, they're all affected by it too. Megan Rapinoe, the US footballer, when she retired, she gave a really good speech, which she said, anybody who's got a platform should throw down ladders to those who don't have a voice. And I think you'll see in this report, one of the real things about the world getting tougher is more people are turning to the dance floor. There's more, suddenly everybody's discovering strands and, all of this sort of fast music. And that's great, but we need to do more with it. Everybody's voice needs to be heard. So think about what your platform is and what ladders you can throw down. I'll get off the pulpit now and get back onto why I'm actually here. Right. The first part of this is all about how the overall industry is doing. And I'm going to go through those slides a bit more quickly. The main reason they're there is so that you've all got these numbers to hand. And if you're wondering, how can I get these numbers? After this, you're going to be sent an email with a link to go and download the report. So sort of think about this as being your music industry encyclopedia that's always there when you need the numbers. Then we're going to go into fans and creators. Talk about the industry, and we had lots of stuff there about social platforms and fandom, etc. And then finally onto market size. There are 4 key themes which you're going to hear quite a bit in here. Number 1 is the role of scenes and fandom. Number 2 is the rise of subcultures. Number 3 is the rise of the global south. And the 4th, everyone is a DJ. So first of all, the overall recorded music business. And reminder, these first slides aren't just about the electronic music industry, it's the wider music industry. It was a really good year, right? Growth actually was faster, stronger than it had been in the year before. And crucially, even though this might sound like a bad news story, it's actually a good news story. Streaming grew less fast than the overall industry for the first time ever in streaming's history. Why is that a good thing? Because the music industry is learning how to diversify. The biggest growth thing that happened last year was expanded rights. That's things like merch and live and sponsorship, all the bits of that record labels play in. Physical, massive growth in physical revenues. They're really important because if you think about what the last 10 years have been, it's about consumption. It's about getting people to pay to listen. But listening on its own isn't really what music is about, and it's certainly not what electronic music is about, and that's why fandom is so important. Now, while the wider music industry sees fandom as how much money can we make out of our customers, for electronic music, fandom and scenes have always been the secret superpower, and it's a real time to lean into that, I think, for the electronic music industry. Publishing grew even faster than recording. I said I was going to go through these quickly. Music subscribers, we're nearly at 1 billion subscribers globally. Now, the really important bit, and this is the first time you hear me talk about the global south, most of that growth is now coming outside of the West. It's India, it's China, it's Brazil, it's Mexico. This is where tomorrow's music business is being built. Now, I'm going to hazard a guess that most of us in this room, our businesses, our audiences, our fans are mainly in the West. That is increasingly going to change, where the real surge is going to be in these global south markets. And the reason why it's so important and so different, the old recorded music business, you had to have a good amount of money in your pocket to be able to take part in it, to go and buy a CD, to go and buy vinyl, a cassette, whatever. Now where you can monetize scale, suddenly these countries that have got huge populations, but low spending power are suddenly becoming music powerhouses. And why that matters, it's not just about audience. If you rewound to 20 years ago and you're in Indonesia, you probably weren't thinking about one of your career options going into music because there wasn't an industry to make your career in. Now we're beginning to see indigenous music cultures and businesses really thrive there. So expect a lot of global South music export happening. We're going to hear more and more from sounds of India and Indonesia and Brazil, etc., working their way into the West. This is looking at revenues of the leading publishers, DSPs, live music and labels. And looking at the growth rates of all of them, it was DSPs that grew fastest. The reason you should pay attention to that is because DSPs, and apologies for any that might be in the room, are learning how to get more of the money to them. Think about, these might look like relatively small things or unimportant things or things that don't affect you, but there was something happened recently where Spotify and Amazon Music got the rights holders to agree to give them a carve out for audiobook subscriptions. What it means is they basically, on the whole, pay $1 less to the rights holders for the money that they charge consumers. Spotify's got discovery mode, keeps hold of 30% of royalties in order to give you more play in the algorithm. All of these things mean that the DSPs are getting a progressively larger share of the pie. Labels, we've seen there's obviously been a lot of consolidation, M&A, etc. I think it's really important for us to stop thinking about the world as majors versus indies, because there's this whole new tier of big labels that sit in the middle that aren't really indie in any other way than them simply not being the majors. They've got the same huge resources and data infrastructure and all of that kind of stuff. So think about these like mid-cap labels. Really important, but they behave more like majors than they do independents. There's no value judgment on that, but it's just time to think that it's really those three tiers: indies, mid-caps, and majors. Live music, so it's good year in revenues, right? But there's something going on beneath the surface. In the US, fewer tickets were sold, even though revenue went up. And this is something which is not just in live music, it's happening in in electronic music as well. So people are saving up the money to go out less frequently. And that's great. You get these massive events with really great experience, loads of VIP, and everybody's getting the revenue, etc., etc. But it means that the audience are doing less because it's costing them more to go out. And we'll have to think about how long can that carry on before it really starts to impact things. So onto fans and creators. What we're looking at here is Spotify monthly listeners of electronic music artists. So it's a cumulative number. So if you listen to 3 different electronic music artists, you count as 3. And when you think about it that way, we end up with this really interesting thing. Germany, Australia, Netherlands, they have 5 times more electronic music listeners than they have people in the countries, right? So when you're thinking about how big and important a market is, it's not just how many people there are there, but how big a cultural role is electronic music playing. And Spotify monthly listeners is a good starting point for that. Another really important thing is in electronic music's biggest markets, electronic music in all except for one of those markets is one of the top 3 genres, really culturally central. The only one it's not is Mexico, where Latin obviously forces its way in. So there's this really difficult balance, isn't there? Which is like, how do you maintain having that central cultural role while also keeping the essence of the underground? There is no blueprint of how to do that. Lots of people try it different ways, but it's always this thing about how do you maintain that big reach across any given market across the globe while also remaining authentic. In some ways, there's a really important trend that's making that easier. The algorithm, whether that's on Instagram or Spotify or wherever it might be, has spent the last 10 years fragmenting us into niches, right? So the idea you probably see loads and loads of stats about how there are fewer artists breaking through. The big superstars are a smaller share of overall streams, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because everything is fragmenting. And that's good from the underground perspective. But the risk is how fragmented does it get before nobody can build a big enough audience to be able to build a career around. When you add it all up across these major platforms, the fan base grew by 0.6 billion people in 2025. Now, again, these are, there'll be overlaps between them, et cetera, and it's, some total of people following electronic music artists, et cetera. But there is clearly really strong momentum. And it's on a par. Electronic music is growing at pretty much the same rate as everything else. Hip hop, which was ahead of electronic music, but only 1%. It grew by 6%, while electronic music by 6%. So electronic music is holding its own in a growing market. I mentioned at the start about the importance of fandom and scenes. When you look at what is important about being part of a scene, and you're looking here, the two bars, the orange one is electronic music fans, the pink one is overall consumers. You see, electronic music fans over-index for everything, but there's some really important ones. Somewhere I can be myself, where I can bond over shared interests. And these are the sort of things where thinking about scenes from the ground up. There's this music industry focus on fandom of the last few years, but fandom is only a symptom. Identity is the cause. Understanding why people identify with that scene, then you understand what matters rather than simply how many t-shirts can I sell. There's been, everybody will have known over the course of the last 5 years how we've seen this growth of the consumerization of creation. Everyone is creating. We've got a big panel at MIDiA of creators that we survey all the time, but we also survey consumers about the creation. And whether that's singing, playing guitar, making music software, using Gen AI, whatever it is, just over half of overall consumers do something creative. And the reason this matters is the more creative you are, corresponds with the more that you're a music fan. So the people, for example, using Gen AI, and we'll probably have loads and loads of debates about, the rights and wrongs and, rights issues and whatever else about AI. But consumers who are using Gen AI, they're 5 times more likely to buy music merch. They're 3.5 times more likely to go to concerts and gigs. They listen about 50% more on streaming than the average consumer. And, these Tom York Radiohead sung years and years ago, anyone can play guitar. Well, they can't. Anybody who's tried to play guitar knows it's not that easy. But anybody can write a text prompt. And so we are at this stage now where more and more people are going to lean into making music, blurring the lines between the audience and the creator. And you can make a load of really valid arguments. There's going to be a hell of a lot of crap made. Yes, there will be. But that misses the point. It's the ultimate form of expression of identity and fandom to actually go and have a go at making the stuff yourself and modifying your favorite artist's music. And onto AI, contractual obligation. But, you can't have a presentation today without talking about AI. The numbers are big. I mean, the numbers are really big in terms of how fast everything is growing. When you plot the growth of the number of people using Gen AI apps, easy for me to say, what you see is the growth matches what Instagram and WhatsApp were in their early years. It's really, really strong growth. Now, you might think that 63 million monthly active users, you might think, well, I've heard Suno say they've got more users than that. What we're looking at here is active users, so not just somebody who's downloaded the app and used it once, and we deduplicated. So if you're using Suno and Udio, you only get counted once. So there's 63 million people using it. About 6 million are paying. And the really interesting thing is, if you look at the amount that they are spending each month, it's about 2 or 3 times more than they're spending on their streaming subscription. Right? So that means that consumers who are leaning in to create think it's 3 times more valuable to them than listening to music. This is why I just really want to hit this point home that the consumer creator is the ultimate music fan. This second bullet, I actually put the exact same words in last time, which is large populations can give the impression of regional trends being global. And then I was making it about, well, Latin looks huge, but it's actually concentrated in a few really big countries. I've got big populations. Keep it in here, but to flip it the other way around this time, which is you might have a really big audience, but and it might look global to you, but look up at the makeup of it. How many of those people are in Indonesia or Brazil or Turkey? How much of your quote unquote global reach is truly global versus Western? So onto the industries, and this is where we got loads of data, some of it from partners who've been really generous with sharing the data. First of all, looking at the situation in Ibiza, revenue's going up, but the average number of events has been going down a bit. Again, echoing that same thing about, sort of people are spending more to do things less frequently, but nonetheless, the spending is there. And this doesn't even really factor in VIP and all those other ways in which a huge amount of revenue is being generated. So we have got this clear demand. We've clearly got people who still want to pay to dance. We've still got people who want a really big experience. Maybe their expectations are higher about what the experience is going to be. And more of them are willing to go and get that VIP treatment, get closer to the artists they love. One thing to bear in mind against all of this is, if you're coming out of university and you're looking at the job world and you're thinking, well, there aren't any jobs because everybody's using AI to do the entry-level jobs. And I can't really afford my rent anymore. And fuel prices are going up. Life is becoming more expensive. And if we can't work out a way to get the younger people on the dance floor, then that is a problem. So it's like, how do you balance out those two sides of the equation, generating revenue where people are willing to spend on VIP and everything else, but also bringing in the younger audiences who are finding it harder and harder to get by. Looking at the Beatport stuff here, first of all, if you make tech house, great. You're at the top, you've stayed at the top, and nothing's threatening you at all. Melodic house and techno is definitely, having a moment. But one I'm going to sort of pull out is if you look down at Afro house, even though it's sort of, fluctuated a bit, look at where it was in 2023 versus where it is now. And this is a real sign, when I was talking about the rise of global South sounds and culture beginning to export, Afro house is the most obvious. But if we think about what the Beatport numbers are telling us is what has already happened. We want to look at what is going to happen. You look at what sounds people are using. And looking at the most searched for genres on Splice, look what's happened to Afro house. Right, so there's always recommend, if you want to get an idea of where music is heading, then, look at the beats and the samples that people are using. Catalog investments. There is no getting away from the fact that the influx of capital into the music industry, for better or for worse, is huge, is growing, and is self-perpetuating. And what I mean by self-perpetuating is, if you've gone and raised X billion dollars to go and invest in music catalogs, you have to invest that money. So you have to find those catalogs to go and buy, because otherwise, particularly with interest rates high as they are, that money is expensive just to leave in the bank account. You need to deploy it, you need to spend it. And then what you end up with is you keep it for 5 years and you sell it to another investor who then goes and buys it. So it becomes self-perpetuating. Electronic music has really started to rise in importance. The growth of the share of the deals that were electronic music in 2025 versus 2024 was off the charts. So nearly a fifth of all catalog investments now are for electronic music artists. There's a really important bit there. Look at this. The average year of the acquired catalogs overall is 1990, but for electronic music is 2005. Why is that important? Because it means it's more culturally relevant. And if you look at what sort of Armada's been doing with sort of doing all the remixes, etc., electronic music is much easier to make even more culturally contemporary than it is with non-electronic music catalogs. This shows you just the reach of Beatport, and we can't underestimate the role and the importance of the role that Beatport plays. TikTok for better or for worse, because it's undoubtedly where a huge amount of music culture happens. Maybe not quite as great at converting into streams all the time and, you know, trying to second guess what the algorithm does. But it is clear that there is a huge amount of momentum there. And, you know, don't take it for granted when I say growth and momentum. These things don't always happen. 2025 and indeed 2024 is a year where everywhere you look at growth, momentum, things are building. So these are all really positive indicators that we shouldn't take for granted. 15 million posts under the DJ hashtag. That's the first account of everyone's a DJ. There'll be more. But also everyone's a DJ. Think about what the DSPs are doing. Think about Apple Music's Auto Mix or Spotify's AI DJ. Just in the same way that everybody's leaning into creation, more people are leaning into curation as well. One bit where there wasn't as much momentum, here we're looking at the UK's dance music share of singles and albums charts and the top 100 singles charts, basically held its own, didn't move that much. Part of that is fragmentation. You know, so there were fewer dance music hits. What we're seeing is this sort of like polarization of success of artists. On the one hand, you've got this huge growth of the long tail and mid-level artists. On the other hand, we're beginning to see the superstar bit really dominated by those mid-cap and major label artists. They're the ones who've got the resources and the data learning to be able to know how to maximize the algorithm. Doesn't sound very cultural, does it? Doesn't really sound like it's about the music, but that's what is needed, is pure business mechanics to really compete at that top end. So that leaves most of everybody else competing in the rest. Here we go again. Everyone's a DJ. 39% growth of uploads tagged with DJ set on SoundCloud. And SoundCloud is another platform that we really shouldn't take for granted. SoundCloud's role in electronic music culture is huge and is also continuing to grow. In the UK, it's the #1 genre, #2 in the US. What is so important about SoundCloud is it's not simply about listening, it's about community, it's about scenes. And then if you look at the difference between the growing electronic scenes, Indonesian breakbeat, Vienna house, South Korean EDM, Guatemalan guaracha, the global South again rising. The cultures and the scenes are coming from different places. Festivals, and what we do for this every year is we go look at all the lineups of the festivals and look at what percentage of them are DJ or electronic music artists. Down a little bit in 2025, but it's only 1 percentage point, so nothing too much to be concerned about. I think the easier way to read this is it's been pretty much the same for the last few years. One thing which is almost sort of like a, not quite a dirty secret, but is certainly a problem that needs to be addressed, is there is still this massive male skew within electronic music in DJs and producers. We can see it's beginning to change, and that's great. 13%, 14%, 15%, but it's too slow. It's like, what all of you think about, what is it that you can do to remove what might be invisible barriers to enable that to shift at a faster rate? So key things to take away from this. Gender gap is narrowing, but there's still a lot of work yet to do. Afro house in particular, up, up, up. One thing I skimmed by on, by the way, on the SoundCloud data, you might have seen in the text, we've seen a rise of harder, faster styles. And back at the start, when I was talking about there is so much going on in the world at the moment that is affecting us all in so many different ways, one of the ways that the dance floor is responding is with faster, angrier music. Right, so finally, moving on to the big number. 6% is what the industry, the dance electronic music industry grew by in 24. It grew by 7% in 2025. And you could see all the things that we put in there. You know, this is everything from the hardware through to concerts and merch and, you know, all of those things in between. Not everything grew at the same rate. For the first year this year, we added in the money that DSPs make from electronic music. So that's, if you think about when you pay your $11.99, there's the money that goes to the labels, money that goes to the publishers, and then there's the money that the DSPs keep. So we're looking at that DSP bit that's related to electronic music. That was one of the fastest growing bits of the electronic music industry last year. Again, because of all those things I was talking about earlier on, about the new ways in which DSPs are getting a progressively larger share of the revenue pie. Merch, growing really well. One thing I think is crucially important when thinking about the role of merch. So there's been loads of innovation, right? There's so many cool things being done, going beyond just the idea of selling a t-shirt. But think about, if you think about fandom like a crop, right? Selling a t-shirt is harvesting the crop. What needs to be done is it always needs reseeding, it needs cultivating. And that's one of the things which we essentially as an industry rely too heavily upon the fans to essentially self-germinate fandom. It just grows, it's there, it's the scenes, and then we tap into it. What can be done to actually play a role in helping fandom grow? Now, if you look at the South Korean labels, they've done it in a pretty cynical, heavily industrialized, very capitalist way, but they've learned how to grow fandom itself. If you look, some of the labels, they publish their blueprint for how they build an artist. The first thing they do with an artist is they take them on a meet and greet tour, right? And you're literally shaking hands and all that sort of stuff. And then they start building up their brand. Then they do some live touring. And the last thing they do is focus on streaming, right? So, it's essentially the equivalent of playing a cold, wet Tuesday night to 12 people. And we really need to think about how more of that can be done, because what social does is it essentially, when people, whether it's a label or a promoter or whatever else, looking at the social signals, right, that's somebody we need to dive into. So often these days, people have got big on social before they've got big offline. And so they might be saying, well, I'm only going to be playing this sort of size capacity venue because look how many followers I've got, but they might not yet be ready for it. And outside of electronic music, there's this sort of stealth strategies being done by some labels with rock artists. And what they're doing is they're signing them and not releasing music. Right? Then they'll record one song and put it up on Spotify so that you know that the artist exists when you've seen them. The social is simply footage of gigs and saying what's coming next. So there's no sort of, here's what I'm having for breakfast and all that sort of stuff. And they're building up a genuine fan base. And once they've built up the fan base through live, only then do they switch to actually releasing them. And I think there's something in that about because you can go big quickly, should you go big quickly? So a few key takeaways here. It was a good year, strong growth across lots of revenue formats. Rise of harder, faster sounds shows us that electronic music acts as almost like a sonic mirror to the world around us. And we can't ignore that things like AI and fragmentation, commodification, they're happening. And with all the political uncertainty and everything else, but the escapist role of the dance floor has never been more important. Thank you very much.